Sound crossing, the night the violin. Played the fog, first-person boys love Seattle Bainbridge ferry, where 4,000 words, single narrator. Hook, for seconds. The ferry horn cut off mid-blast, my E-string snapped like a scream, and a deckhand I'd never met shouted my name over the car deck. "Adrian, don't move!" I didn't know how he knew me, or why the water suddenly sounded like a question I couldn't answer. You learn the Puget Sound by color long before you learn it by chart. Morning gray, commuter steel, afternoon nickel, then the kind of blue you only get when the sky remembers how to be itself. Night is different. Night has flavors of green and black, and the milky white of a wake scribbling a path toward a place that smells like cedar. I take the Seattle Bainbridge run on the last boat more than I want to admit. I live in a rented room above a bakery on the island and busk at Pike Place when the weather and the crowds allow. I play weddings and late-seat symphony subs and anything else that pays. I play because music is the only language I trust not to lie to me, and because speaking on a microphone makes my throat go thick. I don't talk much about the collapse. It was a small stage in a North End church, a fundraiser, a load-bearing beam with a history no one read. The back edge sank half an inch during the second piece, then an inch more, and by the time it gave, all anyone heard was wood and surprise. No one died. No one was seriously hurt. But you can lose a thing without a body count. For me, it was the feeling that invisible forces won't embarrass you in front of everyone. After that, crowds became algebra I didn't want to solve. So, I took the night ferry and learned to love the way the city untangles when it turns its lights on. The first time I noticed him, it was simple. A safety orange jacket moving the way people move when they own their body. Economy, not swagger. Dark hair, neatly cropped, eyes like deep water when it reflects a dock light. Miguel Ortega, the name tag said, deck crew. He had the kind of face that looks quiet from far away and like it laughs easily up close. He stood near the stern gate while I played Bach to a cluster of commuters who pretended not to be listening. He didn't stare. He didn't shush me. He did one small, surprising thing. When a gust rolled through, he set his hand on the stanchion in a way that steadied the air itself. After the set, in the stale popcorn glow of the vending machines, he said, "You picked the ferry on purpose?" "Yes," I said. Acoustics and honesty? People either listen or they don't. They don't clap because a sign tells them to. I lifted my case. "I'm Adrian." "I know," he said simply, but not creepy. "I've heard your name from the woman in the coffee stand." She said, "The violin kid with the good posture." "I'm 28, I said, because some part of me wanted to deserve a different adjective. He smiled. "Then the violin man with the good posture." We didn't flirt, not really. We did a kind of chess it takes a while to learn, the version where both players are making space for the other to decide if this is a game they want to play. He asked where I lived. I asked how long he'd been with WSF. He said 5 years after a stint in the Navy he didn't wear like a badge. I said I'd been in Seattle since undergrad. He said he grew up in Yakima, which explained the way he smelled like apples when the rain lifted. That would have been enough for a night. It wasn't. When I went out to the sun deck to get the skyline, lined up with the mountains the way it does when the ferry is exactly in the right place, he came out and stood a respectful 2 meters away. "You ever get seasick?" he asked. "Only on land," I said. He laughed the entire shape of a bell. "Same," he said. But the truly shocking part hadn't happened yet. A week later, a fog rolled in like a soft animal. The ferry loaded cars that looked like they were already underwater. I'd just tuned when a kid in a yellow raincoat stopped in front of me and said, "Can you play the one that sounds like water trying to remember a story?" I said I didn't know which that was, and he said, "The one with the ladder," which turned out to be Partita No. 2, Allemande, because sometimes 8-year-olds are geniuses with messy hair. I was halfway through when the horn did its job, a long, flat warning for fog. But this time the horn stuttered. It cut off mid-blast like someone had put a hand on its throat. My bow skittered. The E string snapped with a commentary that made 3 people jump, and the ferry did a soft, unsettling list that felt like the boat was thinking about the way weight works. Not danger, not yet. Just possibility. Adrian. Miguel's voice came from the car deck below, and I understood later that he'd recognized the sound of my violin breaking the way carpenters recognize a plank's complaint. Adrian, don't move. Why? I wanted to say, but I already knew. When a boat changes its mind, you either let it or you become the person trying to stop weather with a spoon. The captain came on the PA. Folks, we've got a minor issue with the horn and a fog bank moving faster than forecast. We're reducing speed and sounding alternate signals. Please stay clear of the car deck for the next 5 minutes. People obeyed with the exact ratio of irritation to compliance that ferries teach you over years. I looked at my string like it had betrayed me. Miguel appeared on the passenger deck, eyes flicking to my hands, my face, the nearest exit, the fog, and back again. You okay? He said, already knowing the answer. It's just a string, I said. And the horn, and the water being smarter than us. And the list, he said, smiling a little. Which is fine. The list is like a person trying to find a better way to stand. He went to the nearest handwheel phone, talked to the pilot house in low, quick sentences, then came back. We're good, he said. But we might do a holding pattern near the lane. Fog like this, we don't pick a fight. Don't pick a fight, I repeated, because I collect sentences like small rocks. That's a good rule. Best one we've got, he said. For boats and people. He said it in that way that makes a sentence mean what it says and what it's willing to say if you ask it again. Wait. Don't miss this detail. The next morning, a folded piece of staff paper waited for me on the bench where I usually tune. On it, in red pencil, someone had written, "Play me when the fog lifts." The notes were Bach, but the phrasing marks were mine. The little slur I always add like a superstition. The tiny hook on the 8th notes that my teacher, Ms. Ung, used to call my signature. My name wasn't on it. No one was around. I tucked it in the case and told myself a nice story. Some other busker had borrowed my style like you borrow salt from a neighbor. Fast forward a day, another note. This one said, "Hold your elbow here with a little arrow and the exact diagram, Ms. Ung used to draw when my bow arm got proud." The red pencil looked like hers, too. She died the year after the collapse. I hadn't played in a lesson room since. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want it to be weird. I also didn't tell anyone because I wanted it to be some kind of magic, loving, practical, private. When my brain finally chose a suspect, it was not a romantic one. Old men on ferries love to talk about their high school trumpets. I figured one of them had been a violin dad in another life and couldn't help himself. That night, Miguel found me tuning in the wind shadow of the bulkhead and said, "You get requests?" "Sometimes," I said, already feeling the paper in my pocket like a warm stone. "Any for you?" he asked. The way he said it made me remember that asking for someone is different than asking from them. "Maybe," I said. "Weird ones." He waited. "Someone's been leaving me marked music," I said. "In red pencil, with comments that sound like my old teacher. Kind ones, firm." "Creepy?" he asked. "I don't think so," I said. "If I thought so, I'd have told you." I meant it. Put another way, I wanted my first telling to be to him, not to the police, and that was less about danger and more about the way he stood between people and weather. He nodded. "I'll keep an eye," he said. "Not because I think you can't, because it costs me nothing to stand in the way of a bad surprise." And there it was. The sentence that rearranged my insides like furniture you didn't realize was blocking the door. It cost me nothing to stand in the way of a bad surprise. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. 2 ferries later, a rehearsal cancellation dumped me on the 6:10 sailing with a patch on my E string and a stubborn idea that I could coax Sarabande out of a deck full of people thumbing through their phones. I had just found the center of the first note when the PA clicked on and a voice I didn't know, one of the relief mates, said, Passenger requests assistance on the pickle fork starboard. A beat. Possible medical. Miguel was closest. He moved like a solution. I followed with my case because one thing the collapse taught me is there are worse places to be than near someone who knows what to do. On the narrow forward deck, a man in a pea coat knelt by a person sitting against the rail. The sitter's eyes were open too wide. Breathing sounded like the beginning of a runaway. "Sir," Miguel said, voice even as a straight edge, "do you feel like the world is too much right now?" He didn't say panic attack. He didn't say calm down. He said a thing that told the truth without making it a diagnosis. The man nodded in a way that looked like it hurt. Miguel crouched, made himself smaller by a few feet, said, "We're going to count the wake. That one," he pointed at a white line sliding left, "is 1. Next is 2. The ferry will do 4 before the bow switches a little. We'll breathe with that." He looked up at me. "You know that piece with the notes that walk instead of run?" "Sarabande," I said. "Could you put the bow on the string and just—" "Let it be a meter?" I did. It felt like a prayer sneaking into a mall. The man's breathing found a crosstown bus, then a neighborhood street, then a driveway. After a while, he said, "I'm okay," and began the business of being embarrassed. Miguel said, "Nothing to be embarrassed about. The body is a very good liar sometimes." He said it so kindly, I wanted to learn it by heart and use it on myself later. The man said thank you 6 times and went inside for soup. Miguel stood, shook out his knees, stretched his back, looked at me like he was checking for cracks. "You all right?" he asked. "I am now," I said. "How did you know to count the wake?" He shrugged. "I'm an EMT off shift when the boat isn't floating. Ferry's a good teacher, too. It says, here, here, here. Every night, whether or not anyone claps. We watch the Space Needle drift to our left like a punctuation mark. After a while, he said, "You haven't asked, so I'll volunteer." It wasn't me with the red pencil. The thought crossed. "I can read music," he said. "Very badly." My mother tried. "I can tie a bowline around a melody, but that's as far as I got." "You?" I asked. He smiled. "Tambourine," he said gravely, and I laughed loud enough that a gull looked offended. "What you've seen so far is nothing." The red pencil notes continued. One said, "Try the half position to save your hand with the exact shorthand Ms. Eng used." Another said, "There is no such thing as perfect intonation. There is only mercy," which sounded like Ms. Ung, but also like a person who'd seen too much of the world to pretend. I started leaving little replies on sticky notes. "Thank you, who are you? This helps." No one claimed them. On a Friday, the ferry was late leaving Seattle, which meant we met a wall of wind in the middle of the Sound. The kind of wind that bullies you just because it can. The horn behaved itself. The boat did not. It listed hard enough that you could hear luggage trolleys whispering about mutiny. The captain came on the PA to tell us what we already knew and to tell the cars to set their brakes harder than usual. And then, the thing no one wants on a ferry, an alarm on the car deck, sharp and chemical. Not loud enough to mean fire. Loud enough to mean someone's version of it. The mate's voice over the radio, tight and controlled. "We have a contractor's toolbox spilling fluids. Looks like acid, maybe battery. Containment requested. People stay calm until the word acid. After that, they become mechanics of their own fear." Miguel was on the car deck. He called up, "We've got it." Absorbent down. "We're going to close the watertight and pop the fans for a minute." The door near my feet, the one I'd never seen move, slid shut with a seriousness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. 2 teenagers cheered like they were on a ride. An old woman clutched her tote and prayed under her breath. I wanted to find Miguel like a plant wants a window. When the door opened again, the air smelled like everything you shouldn't breathe and just enough of what you can. Miguel came up the stair with his jacket open and his radio clipped a little lower than before. Our eyes found each other the way eyes sometimes do when your day feels like it's trying to get you alone. He came over and leaned on the wall next to me like he was tired on purpose. "We good?" I asked. "We're good," he said. "We had a dumb thing. We fixed the dumb thing. Now we are a little sharper than we were." "My bar for sharp keeps moving," I said. "Same," he said. "You hungry?" I was, always, but the language had to be talked around. "I could eat," I said. He grinned. "Great," he said, "because I'm starving." He said it like he was acknowledging a thing that wasn't food. We went to the crew mess because the vendor had closed early. He split a turkey sandwich and a small pile of Tim's chips with the seriousness of a treaty. We talked about nothing, and about the way the sound changes when the orcas are around, and about how people on boats are versions of themselves they can't always be on land. We didn't touch. We did the thing where you remember each other's sentences and give them back better. When we docked, he said, "I clock out in 20. You want me to walk you to your bakery?" He said it like an offer and not like a question that had a right answer. "Yes," I said, and the fog decided not to return, and the ferry let cars go in a ribbon down Winslow Way, and we walked in that cold that makes your teeth polite. At my door, he said nothing profound. He said, "See you on the last boat," and I said, "Play me when the fog lifts." And he looked at me like I'd told him a secret people spend years trying to remember. You won't believe this, but the person with the red pencil revealed themselves by not revealing themselves. I left a note that said, "If you're friendly, leave a comma." They left two. Then none. Then a drawing of a bow hand so accurate it made my palm itch. I began talking to Ms. Ung in my head like she was the hand behind the red. "All right," I said. "I'm trying." At some point, I noticed the handwriting wasn't hers. It slanted left, not right. It had the tidy impatience of someone who does 10 other things better than this. A deck log came to mind. I shook it out like a misunderstanding. Miguel had said it wasn't him. One evening, when I opened my case, there was a red pencil inside. It was cheap and perfect. It had a bite mark at one end. I looked around. No one looked back. I played Bach like a person with a map. Back on the island, my landlord Donna left out soup and bread the way people who cook for a living leave out affection. I ate on the back steps with a blanket and texted Miguel a photo of the pencil captioned, "You sure?" He wrote back, "I wish. I'm not that good, but I'd like to be the person who knows the person who is. What you've seen so far is nothing. The last boat on a Tuesday is a church if you let it be. Everyone's sitting with their small catastrophes, drinking coffee they forgot how to taste. The whole thing rocking like a mother holding a kid who won't stop arguing with their own body." I tuned quietly. A man in a suit slept with his mouth open. 2 teenagers took pictures of the city and pretended they weren't. A woman in a yellow jacket, you could see her from space, stood near the bow and talked on the phone in Spanish, so loving it made me miss my mother even though she texts me 3 times a day. We were past the midpoint, when the fog found us again, thick as bread. The horn worked this time, a good solid long with the occasional short boat Morse. The ferry slowed and then slowed again, and I felt that weird thing where stopping in water feels like sinking. I packed the violin without making it look like fear and went to the pickle fork to listen to the fog say the same sentence over and over. Miguel came up on my right, like he had learned a choreography he liked and didn't want to change. "Ever think," he said, "about what the horn would sound like if it had feelings?" "It already does," I said. "It sounds like confidence pretending to be confidence." He nodded, pleased. "We're holding for traffic," he said. "There's a tug that wants to be us but shouldn't." The radio crackled in a way that felt like a throat clearing. The mate said, "We've got an unresponsive phone in a parked car. License plate? We've paged the owner twice. No response." Then lower, "There's a small dog inside." Miguel's mouth did the thing mouths do when you want to say something ice-cold about people, and then remember you are a person too. "I'm going down," he said. "Stay where you can hear me or where you can't. Either works." "I'll be on the rail," I said. 5 minutes later, the entire boat had an opinion. 5 minutes after that, the owner arrived to a small, polite storm and apologized in the way people do when they don't know what else they were supposed to be doing and also know that wasn't it. The dog was fine. The ferry moved. The horn cried like a forgiving thing. I was about to exhale when the PA said, "We have a missing person report from the main cabin. Last seen near the stern starboard side. If you are looking for a friend, please find a crew member." That sentence ricochets in a metal room. People look at the floor like they'll find a clue. They don't. A missing person on a ferry at night in fog is a sentence you don't finish out loud. My ribs forgot how to be a cage. Miguel came in at speed, eyes open in that way his are. "Stay here," he said, then softer. "I know you want to help. Stay here anyway." He and two crew ran a route I recognized from the way he moved when he counted wake. Efficient, thorough, designed to hand the universe as few chances as possible. The ferry launched a man-overboard procedure the way schools do fire drills. Quickly, precisely, with everyone hoping it is practice even when it isn't. The captain's voice was a metronome. People gathered in clusters, inventing reasons to be useful. I couldn't stand not doing anything. So I did the only thing I know how to do when a room needs something it can't name. I took the violin out and I played the simplest thing I own, an open-string drone under a melody anyone could hum. Not because I thought sound could find a person in fog, because people need a job and sometimes that job is breathing. I played for 3 minutes, then 2, then 1. Inside of 10 minutes, the missing person was found, asleep in a corner against a pillar, their body doing the animal thing where it survives by shutting a door. The boat exhaled in 50 silent languages. I packed the violin and leaned against the rail until my spine remembered words. Miguel came back. He didn't say good job. He didn't say what were you thinking. He said, hey, the way you say I saw you without making a banner. Then, come with me. We were late for a bus. He took me to the crew corridor behind a door that smells like wet rope and coffee. He stood there for a long second like his feet needed to cool. Then he said, if I had lost someone tonight, I would have wanted you to keep playing, and I would have wanted to break the door that kept it from happening. Both would have been true. I didn't know what else to do, I said. That's the best time to do what you're good at, he said, when nothing else volunteers. And just when I thought it was over, when we docked, the fog parted like a reasonable person, and we slid into Bainbridge like a hand into a glove. People applauded the way people applaud land when they get to it. Outside the terminal, under a light that has always been too yellow, Miguel and I stood with our bodies pretending they hadn't learned a new verb. You hungry? He asked. Always, I said. Great, he said. Because I am. We walked to a Thai place still open because the owner is a saint who does not believe in clocks. We ate pad see ew like it was our job. We talked about father's and Ms. Ung and his mother's insistence that he learn an instrument doomed by his lack of patience. He asked a question with his eyes, and I nodded with mine, and we held hands under the table like we were doing something illegal in a country that is only sometimes kind. We walked back the long way and stopped at the waterfront where the pilings make a sound like low applause. He said, I want you to know I'm not good at speeches. And I said, I am, but only with a violin. And he laughed that bell again. He touched my wrist, not my face. He wanted to be able to let go if I needed him to, and didn't think he would have to. We kissed, and it was the easiest thing I have done since the day Ms. Ung put my fingers on a string and said, push, lift, now sing. It was not fireworks. It was a stack of kindling finally finding one match. The next morning, a final red pencil note waited on my bench. It said, you're holding it right. Now hold it the way you hold a hand. Underneath, for the first time, an initial. M.I. stared. My first M was Ms. Ung. My second was Miguel. My third was many. I did the stupid thing where you try to match handwriting to a person you're in love with on 13 hours of sleep. It wasn't his. I knew because I had seen him fill out a form. His letters stood at attention. These slanted like someone leaning into a wind, so I did a thing I should have done sooner. I asked Donna at the bakery. She knows everyone. Red pencil? She said. Oh, honey. That's Marta. Takes the last boat 3 nights a week. Teaches orchestra at the middle school. She used to study with a woman named Ung when she was at UW. I've seen her mark with those little angry hearts over the dotted eighths. Angry hearts, I said. She smiled. The teacher kind. Kind heart, impatient notes. Does she like to be thanked? Yes, Donna said. She also likes to pretend she doesn't, so do it anyway. That night I waited by the bench with a red pencil of my own. A woman with wind-tired hair and a good coat sat like she'd been sitting in that spot since Lincoln. I said, are you Marta? And she said, depends who's asking. And I showed her the pencil, and she laughed without embarrassment. I liked your bow arm, she said. It reminded me of mine before I learned not to hate myself for missing. You studied with Ms. Ung, I said. Me too. She was a door, Marta said, and we didn't need to say more. Thank you, I said. For the maps, They're not maps, she said. Just arrows. You drew the map. Then she waved a hand like an ant and said, Go play something happy. The boat's tired. I played a reel so cheerful the gulls rolled their eyes. Miguel leaned on the bulkhead and watched like a person reading a book they already like on a train they like even more. When I finished, he didn't clap because no one else did. He mouthed here and I mouthed me too, and the ferry honked along, contented long for the fog that wasn't coming. Last second shock. A week later, a tourist DM'd me a short video they'd taken of the ferry pushing through a low cloud of fog at sunset. We didn't notice this until we got home, the message read. In the clip, you can see the Seattle skyline doing its soft neon thing, the wake making a white road, and on the windward side of the pickle fork, two figures leaning toward each other just enough to mean yes. One wears an orange jacket and a radio. The other has a violin case strap across his chest. Both are tiny, the way true things are when you don't know where to look. The caption the tourist added without knowing us, the night the boat played a song. I sent it to Miguel with us. Then and he wrote back. Small, honest, enough, which is, it turns out, a complete sentence. That evening I took the last boat. Marta wrote, Stop apologizing over a measure, and drew a ridiculous heart that made me laugh through my nose. Miguel counted wake with a kid who was learning how to breathe. The horn spoke like a person with a good opinion of itself. I played Bach, then a reel, then something that isn't in any book but lives in my hands now. When we docked at Bainbridge, the waterlight on the pilings cut a green path to the ramp. People applauded land. I liked water better. On the walk up Winslow Way, we did our dumb little inventory of the day's weather, the way you do when you've chosen a person and want to make their heaviness carryable. At my door, Miguel stopped like he always does. You're good? He asked. I am, I said. And because I wanted it to be true tomorrow, I added, I'm here. He said, Me too, and kissed me like a person who understands clocks and still chooses a longer hour. Sighed. I propped the violin by the window, the way you do when you're not done listening. I texted my father a photo from the boat, the skyline, the wake, the tiny two people near the bow. He responded with what counts as a poem for him. Water remembers. So do we. I went to sleep with the sounds green in my head. Sometimes the safest place isn't a lock or a rule. It's a sentence two people say at the same time, on a boat that refuses to lie about how much the world moves. I'm here, I say. Me too, he says. And the night, for once, believes us.